Welcome, my friends, the podcast where we listen, we relax, and we get sleepy. Before we begin, let's take a moment to settle in. Find a comfortable position. Gently close your eyes, take a deep breath in, and a long, slow breath out. Tonight, we are untethering ourselves from the bright, demanding glow of screens and the endless stream of information. We are leaving behind the world of notifications and deadlines. The only schedule we'll be following is the gentle rhythm of the tides and the soft echo of a distant church bell. It's a timetable of such profound slowness, you might find it almost alarmingly relaxing. But that's why we're doing this from the comfort of your bed, where such tranquility is not a challenge, but a gift. Our destination tonight is a city built on water and dreams, a place where history whispers from every stone, a moonlit, slumbering Venice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, I'd love for you to leave a comment, letting me know what city you're listening from and what time it is for you there. It's a quiet, lovely way for us to feel connected in this shared stillness. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air changes first. It grows cooler, heavier with the scent of salt and damp, ancient stone. You have arrived not at a bustling train station or a crowded airport, but at a small, forgotten pier on the edge of the lagoon. The moon, full and bright, hangs like a pearl in the inky sky, its light turning the surface of the water into a sheet of rippling silver. There is a profound silence here, a quiet so deep that it feels more like a presence than an absence. The distant sirens, the background noise of a modern city, it's all gone. All that remains is the gentle, rhythmic lapping of water against the mossy wooden poles of the dock. Loca sound as soft and steady as a sleeping heartbeat. You take a step onto the stone of Venice itself. The ground beneath your feet feels solid, eternal. The flagstones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, are uneven, and you notice the slight dip and rise of the path. They are not cold, they seem to hold the memory of a sun that set long ago. Moonlight washes over everything, bleaching the color from the facades of the old buildings, leaving them in shades of silver and deep shadow. You are standing in a small square, a campialo, and the windows of the houses surrounding you are dark. Everyone is asleep. The city belongs to you and to the moon. You begin to walk with no destination in mind. Your footsteps make a soft, solitary sound on the stone, a counterpoint to the quiet whisper of the water that is ever present. You remember reading that this entire city is a miracle of engineering, built on a foundation of more than 100 islands, held together by a forest of ancient, wooden stilts driven deep into the mud of the lagoon. Standing here in this impossible floating city, the fact feels less like an engineering marvel and more like a form of magic. As you wander, you become aware of a unique perfume that belongs only to Venice at night. It's a mix of cool, damp stone, the deep, briny scent of the lagoon, and a faint, almost green note of algae that clings to the foundations just at the waterline. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is the scent of history itself, of time measured in tides and seasons rather than in clocks. It's the breath of the city. You turn a corner, expecting a street, but instead, you find a canal. Ink-dark water reflects the moon with perfect clarity, a shattered mirror of light. The buildings on either side seem to lean in, as if sharing secrets across the narrow waterway. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how a city without the constant hum of wheels, without the rush of traffic, reshapes the very rhythm of human thought? Does time itself move differently here? measured not in the anxious ticking of a clock, but in the slow sway of a tide, or the passage of a single, silent boat. You feel your own pace slowing, your breath deepening to match the gentle rhythm of this place. The weight of the day of the week seems to dissolve into the cool night air. You are here in the quiet heart of a sleeping dream. You feel a pull towards the water, a gentle invitation to see where these liquid streets might lead. You follow that silent pull, leaving the small moonlit square behind. You step into a narrow alley, the kale so slender that you could almost stretch out your arms and touch both walls at once. The moment you enter, the world changes. The open expanse of the sky is gone, replaced by a thin ribbon of indigo velvet far above. The towering buildings on either side seem to lean towards each other, their dark windows like closed eyes. It is not claustrophobic, it feels like an embrace, ancient corridor shielding you from the rest of the world. The sound of the lapping water is closer now, more intimate. It's right beside you, just beyond a low stone barrier. You are walking alongside a small, hidden canal, one of the city's secret veins. Here, in this confined space, the acoustics are magical. Every tiny sound is amplified, purified. The gentle shush-h of water swirling against the base of a building sounds like a soft exhalation. A single drop of condensation falling from a stone archway into the canal below creates a clear, musical plink that echoes for a moment before disappearing. You can hear the subtle rasp of your own clothing as you move, the soft pad of your shoes on the worn flagstones. It is a symphony of quietness. You pass under a to portico, a dark passage that tunnels directly through the ground floor of a building. For a few steps, you are in near total darkness, the air growing even cooler and more damp. You can feel the immense weight of the centuries-old structure above you, yet there is no sense of menace. It feels solid, permanent. As you emerge on the other side, the water beside you catches the moonlight again, and something extraordinary happened. The light from the sky doesn't reach the canal's surface directly, but the rippling water acts as a liquid mirror. It catches the silver glow from above and casts it back upwards, painting shimmering, dancing patterns on the dark stone walls beside you. You stop for a moment just to watch. Waves of light, fluid and silent, chase each other up the ancient bricks like a waking dream. It is a light show designed for an audience of one. This is the Venice that few daytime visitors ever see. The labyrinth, a place where a map is almost useless, and the only true way to navigate is to surrender, to let go of the idea of a destination and simply walk. You follow the curve of the canal, your path dictated by the whims of architects from 1,000 years ago. Sometimes the alley opens into a tiny, forgotten courtyard with a single dormant well in its center. Sometimes it leads to a dead end, a dead end, where your only option is to turn back and retrace your steps, noticing details you missed the first time. And you begin to wonder, in our modern world, we are so obsessed with straight lines, with efficiency, with the fastest route from one point to another. We see a labyrinth as a problem, a puzzle to be solved, a thing to escape from. But what if that's not its purpose? What if a labyrinth is an invitation to slow down, to become present, to pay attention to the journey itself? Here, in the sleeping heart of Venice, getting lost feels like a mistake and more like a form of meditation. Usually so busy planning and navigating, is allowed to rest. It has no choice but to let your senses take over. You are not thinking, you are simply feeling, seeing, listening. The scent of the water is stronger here, a clean mineral smell mixed with the faint, sweet perfume of night blooming jasmine railing from an unseen balcony far above. You round another bend, and the narrow waterway opens slightly into a small basin. And there, floating silently by a set of worn stone steps leading down to the water, is a long dark shape. It is a gondola, moored and motionless. It rests on the inky water. Its unique iron prow, the pharaoh, catches a sliver of moonlight, its complex shape a silent symbol of the city. There is no one around. The boat just sits there, an empty vessel of dreams, waiting patiently on the quiet water. It seems like the most natural thing in the world to move towards it, to see where this liquid path might lead you next. You approach the steps leading down to the water, your gaze fixed on the elegant, dark form of the gondola. From the deep shadows of a nearby archway, a figure detaches itself from the darkness. He is an old man, his face a beautiful map of wrinkles, his posture relaxed and patient, as if he has been waiting for you, and only you, all evening. He wears the traditional striped shirt and dark trousers, but there is nothing theatrical about him. He is simply a part of the night. He just offers a small, gentle nod and gestures with one hand toward the empty seat in the gondola. It is a silent, profound invitation. You place a hand on his offered arm for balance. It is steady, warm, and strong. As you step from the solid stone onto the boat, you feel it dip and rock beneath you. A moment of gentle instability. The gondolier's grip is sure, and he guides you easily to the plush, velvet-cushioned seat. You sink into it, and the upholstery feels cool and soft against your back. The seat is low, placing you just above the surface of the water, offering a perspective of the city that is both intimate and grand. You are now really part of the canal. With a practiced, fluid motion, the gondolier steps onto the back of the boat. There is no lurch, no sudden movement. He is as light on his feet as a cat. He picks up his long, single oar, the remo, and with a soft push against the stone steps, the gondola is free. It drifts silently into the center of the small basin. The sound of the oar is not what you expect. It's not a splash. It's not a splash. It's a quiet, rhythmic sequence of sounds, a soft creak as the wood of the oar pivots in its special oarla. The four-kola, a gentle swirl as the blade dips into the water, and a near silent dripping as he lifts it for the next stroke. Creak, swirl, drip, creak, swirl, drip, creak, swirl, drip, and then you feel it, the sway. It is the most soothing motion you have ever experienced. It is not the jarring rock of a small boat in an open sea. It is a slow, deliberate, and deeply rhythmic cradle. As the gondolier propels the boat forward, it glides with an almost impossible smoothness. But with each stroke, there is a gentle, corresponding lean to the side, a slow, lulling rock from port to starboard, a liquid lullaby. You feel your body instinctively relax into this rhythm. The muscles in your neck and shoulders begin to soften. Your breathing, without any conscious effort, aligns with the boat's gentle motion. Inhale on the glide, exhale on the sway. The boat breathes beneath you. You trail your fingers in the water. It is cool and feels like silk as it streams past your hand. From this low vantage point, the buildings seem to tower over you like benevolent giants. The moonlight catches the tiny, iridescent shells of sea snails clinging to the green-tinged foundations. You can see the intricate ironwork of a low-arched bridge up ahead, its reflection in the water so perfect that for a moment, it creates the illusion of a complete, unbroken stone circle. And for a few seconds, the sound of the oar in the water deepens, echoing in the enclosed space. You notice how the gondolier stands on the left side of the stern, yet propels the boat in a perfectly straight line. You recall a piece of information, A gentle fact floating up from memory: gondolas are built asymmetrically. The left side is wider than the right, causing the boat to naturally drift and turn. A tendency that the gondolier's masterful stroke perfectly counteracts. It is a design born of centuries of experience, a perfect harmony of form, function, and human skill. This thought leads to a gentle wonder: how much of our lives do we spend fighting against the natural drift of things, trying to force a straight path here? The boat's own nature is not seen as a flaw to be corrected, but as a quality to be understood and worked with. The gondolier doesn't fight the boat, he dances with it. There is a deep, quiet wisdom in that partnership. In this hypnotic, swaying state, you feel a profound sense of letting go. You are not in control, and in that surrender, there is an immense and gentle peace. The gondola glides out of the narrow waterway and into a slightly wider canal. The view of the moonlit sky opens up again. The rhythmic rocking continues, a constant, soothing metronome. Creaks swirl, drip. The old gondolier has not said a word. He is a silent ferryman, navigating the canals of a sleeping city. You feel your eyelids growing heavy, lulled by the motion and the quiet. The gondolier clears his throat, a soft, low sound that doesn't startle you, draws you gently from your reverie. He is about to speak. The journey of the body is about to become a journey of the mind. The gondolier's voice, when it comes, is like the city itself, ancient, textured, and carrying the soft echo of the water. It's a low, gentle baritone, a voice that has been smoothed by solitary, quiet nights. He doesn't turn to look at you. He keeps his gaze forward, his body swaying in that timeless rhythm as he pilots the boat through the liquid dark. Every stone in this city has a story. He begins, his words seeming to rise from the canal itself. And every canal holds a memory. But tonight, we don't listen to the stones. We listen to the water. The water remembers a boy who left this very city, a boy with eyes full of curiosity, who carried Venice in his heart all the way to the other side of the world. You know instantly who he means. The name hangs in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. Marco Polo, a merchant, a traveler, a legend whose story is so grand it has often been mistaken for a dream. People think they know his story. The old man continues. His are making it soft, rhythmic sounds. Creeks swirl, drip. They read the books. They see the statues. But they read it in the bright light of day, in loud libraries. That is not the way. His story is like Venice. It is best understood at night, in the quiet, when you can feel the journey instead of just hearing the words. As he speaks, the gondola glides past a grand, decaying palace. Its Gothic windows are dark and hollow, like the eye sockets of a skull. But the moonlight catches the intricate carvings around them, revealing their delicate beauty. You can almost imagine a young Marco, centuries ago, looking up at these same palaces, his mind already dreaming of the grander, more exotic palaces he had only heard of in sailors' tales. His name was Marco, the gondolier says, his voice dropping even lower, drawing you in. And he was a son of Venice. He grew up with this water, with this salt on the air. He understood the language of trade, the feel of a coin, the weight of silk. But his father and uncle, they were different. They had seen things. They had traveled to the court of the great Kublai Khan, a ruler whose kingdom was so vast, all of Venice would be but a small jewel on his finger. The gondolier pauses, letting the image settle in your mind. The sheer scale of it feels impossible from the confines of these narrow canals. You drift past a small, arched bridge, and you see a flicker of warm, yellow light from a single window high above. Perhaps someone else is awake in the sleeping city, reading a book, or simply watching the moon as you are. They returned to Venice when Marco was a teenager, he says. Imagine that. Your father returns after years away, and he doesn't just bring back gold or spices. He brings back stories. Stories of a world you can't even picture. A world with black stones that burn like wood, with a ruler who uses paper for money, with beasts you have only seen in fantastical drawings. His voice is not a performance. He is simply recounting a memory as if he knew the Polos himself. You can feel the awe in his tone, a wonder that has been passed down through generations of Venetians. The story is part of their identity, and so the desire was planted. The gondolier murmurs, his oar dipping into the water with a soft swirl. A seed of curiosity. He had to know if these stories were true. It wasn't just about wealth, it was about seeing, understanding, filling in the blank spaces on the map, not just on parchment, but in his own mind. This idea resonates deeply as the gondola continues its gentle, rocking journey. You think about the nature of stories. Are they just entertainment, or are they something more, a way to travel without moving? A way to expand the walls of our own experience. Marco Polo, the traveler, became Marco Polo, the storyteller. And his stories, in turn, fueled the dreams of countless others, like Christopher Columbus, who would read his book centuries later and be inspired to sail in the opposite direction. He was just a boy of 17, the gondolier says, his voice now a near whisper. Imagine it. 17. Leaving all this, he makes a subtle gesture with his free hand, encompassing the moonlit beauty of the canals, the sleeping palaces, the deep comforting quiet. For a world of unknowns. A journey into the heart of a legend. The gondola turns into another, darker canal, and the soft lapping of the water against the hull is the only sound. The story has begun. You are no longer just floating through Venice. You are floating on the edge of an epic tale, carried by the voice of the old man and the gentle, hypnotic motion of the boat. The first chapter is about to unfold. The gondolier's voice becomes a thread, pulling your imagination away from the cool, damp stones of Venice and into the sun-drenched memory of a long-ago departure. The gentle rocking of the boat remains your anchor to the present, a soothing, physical reality, but your mind begins to drift, guided by his words. The port of Venice was not like this, he says, his oar stroking the water with its steady, unhurried rhythm. Not quiet, not sleeping. It was the heart of the world, or so we believed. A chaotic symphony of sounds. The shouting of merchants in a dozen languages, the creaking of ropes and pulleys, the hammering of shipwrights repairing a mast. And the smells, tar and timber, spices from the east, wine from the west, and the ever-present scent of the sea. You can almost feel the shift in the air. The cool, calm night of the present seems to part like a curtain, revealing a bustling, sunlit scene from the 13th century. You imagine a young Marco standing on a crowded wharf, the noise a stark contrast to the quiet focus in his eyes. He is no longer just a name in a book, he is a presence, a young man on the cusp of an unimaginable adventure. The gondola you are in glides past a row of brightly colored mooring poles, their painted stripes faded by time and water. They stand like silent, patient sentinels. You imagine the forest of masts that Marco would have seen, a dense thicket of timber pointing to the sky, each one a promise of a different destination: Constantinople, Alexandria, Acre. Leaving was not a simple thing, the gondolier murmurs. It was a spectacle. Families waving from the docks, priests giving blessings for a safe return. For a merchant family like the Polos, A journey of this magnitude was a tremendous gamble. It could bring back riches beyond imagination, or it could swallow them whole, leaving not even a ripple behind. Every departure was a farewell that might be final. You feel a subtle echo of that farewell in the gentle, continuous movement of your own gondola, which is carrying you further into the labyrinth of canals, further from your starting point. The idea of departure settles in your mind, not as a frantic rush, but as a slow, deliberate letting go. Think of what he was leaving. The gondolier's voice softens. The familiar call of the church bells of street marks. The taste of fresh bread from the neighborhood baker. The faces of friends, all the small, comforting certainties of home. To trade them all for what? For a maybe. For a story, for a glimpse of the great Khan's court. The scholar's thought emerges, softened and bidened. What is it in the human spirit that makes us trade comfort for curiosity? What is that deep, quiet pull towards the horizon, towards the unknown that has driven us since the dawn of time? It isn't just ambition. It feels like something more fundamental. I need to know what lies beyond the hill. The ship would have caught the wind in its great square sail, the gondolier narrates, and as he speaks you feel a faint breeze stir across the canal, a soft whisper of air that touches your cheek. He would have watched the campanile, the great bell tower, grow smaller and smaller, until it was just a needle on the horizon. Then it too would sink below the waves, and there would be nothing but the sea. The gondola passes from the narrow canal into a wider, more open stretch of water. It feels like you are entering the Grand Canal itself, but it is deserted. The water stretches out, a vast expanse of shimmering moonlight. You can see the domes of a great church in the distance, their silhouettes dark against the star-dusted sky. The view is expansive, and for a moment you feel a hint of the vastness that Marco must have felt as Venice disappeared behind him. Longer, more profound, like the deep swell of an open sea. You are no longer in the protected maze of the city. You are on the edge of the great lagoon, looking out towards the Adriatic, towards the beginning of that immense journey. The story of leaving is complete. The voyage has truly begun. The gondola continues its serene glide across the open water, the gentle rocking a constant, soothing presence. The grand, silent palaces lining the canal seem to drift by like sleeping giants. The gondolier's voice, a low and steady murmur, weaves itself into the quiet of the night, pulling your thoughts eastward, out onto the open sea with the young Marco. Once Venice was gone, he says, there was only the water. For days, for weeks, the world was reduced to three simple things: the wooden boat, the blue sea, and the endless sky. The vastness of the water you are currently on helps you imagine this. The moon's reflection is a long, wavering path of light stretching across the surface, a road of liquid silver leading to the horizon. At night, the world would transform. The gondolier continues, his voice hushed with reverence. On a clear night, far from the lights of any land, the sky was a spectacle that no king's court could ever hope to match. Not the sky we see now, muted by our cities. A sky of pure, deep black velvet, so thick with stars they looked like spilled diamonds. You tilt your head back, sinking deeper into the soft cushions of your seat. Above you, the Venetian sky has its own smattering of stars, but you let his words paint a far grander picture in your mind. You imagine a sky untouched by artificial light, a sky where the Milky Way is not a faint, cloudy band, but a brilliant, churning river of light, so bright it seems to have depth and texture. The sailors knew the stars, the gondolier murmurs. They were not just beautiful lights, they were their map, their clock, their calendar. They had names for them, stories for them. They would point to Polaris, the North Star, the constant friend of the mariner. They would trace the shapes of Cassiopeia and Orion. For Marco, a boy from a city of stone, this celestial map must have been a revelation, a different kind of navigation, written in light, not on parchment. The gondola makes a slow, graceful turn, the water swirling softly from the oar. The motion is so fluid, you barely notice the change in direction. You are simply being carried, adrift on a sea of moonlight and story. And the silence, the old man adds, the silence of the open sea at night is like the silence of the desert. It is full of small, secret sounds. The creak of the ship's timbers, the sound like an old man's sigh, the snap of the sail as it catches a shift in the wind, the whisper of water rushing along the hull, and sometimes the sound of a dolphin's breath as it surfaces nearby in the darkness. You listen past the gondolier's voice, past the gentle sounds of your own journey, and you can almost hear that ancient maritime quiet. You can feel the coolness of the night air, the slight dampness clinging to everything. You imagine Marco, wrapped in a wool cloak, standing at the ship's rail, feeling the gentle spray of the sea on his face. He is not a historical figure in this moment, he is a young man, filled with a quiet awe, looking up at a universe imagined. This thought drifts into your mind as gentle as the rocking of the boat. We think of travel as covering distance, of moving across the surface of the earth. But maybe true travel is also about stillness, about those quiet moments of observation where you are not going anywhere but simply being present under a vast foreign sky, being a small, quiet witness to the universe. Day after day, the sun would rise, turning the sea to liquid gold, and sat painting the sky in fiery colors. The gondolier's voice is soft, almost a lullaby now, and night after night, the stars would return. That rhythm, that ancient, cosmic rhythm, sinks into your bones. It slows your blood. It quiets your mind. It was the first part of his long, long journey. A period of emptying, leaving Venice behind, not just into a new and much larger world, governed by the sun, the wind, and the eternal stars. The gondola is now entering a narrower canal again, leaving the wide, open water behind. The grand palaces are replaced by more humble, sleeping houses. The feeling is one of moving from a grand public space to a more intimate, private one. The sky becomes a smaller patch above you. It feels like the first leg of that great sea voyage is coming to a close. The ship is approaching land. The starry dome of the Mediterranean is about to be exchanged for the ancient stones of the Levant. The gondola slides from the relative openness of the last canal back into the intimate embrace of a narrower waterway. The towering stone walls rise on either side, and the sound of the oar becomes more pronounced, its gentle creak and swirl echoing softly between the buildings. The gondolier's voice remains low and steady, a calming current beneath his words. After weeks at sea, he says, the first sight of land is a shock to the system. A long, low line on the horizon that slowly thickens and gains color. For the Polos, their first major port of call was the city of Acre, on the coast of what we now call Israel. You imagine that sight. After an eternity of blue and black, the sudden appearance of earthy brown and dusty green. The smell of the air would change, losing some of its clean, briny sharpness, and taking on the scent of dry earth, vegetation, and the distant promise of a bustling city. Acre was not like Venice. The gondolier continues, his oar guiding the boat around a gentle curve. Venice was a city of merchants and water. Acre was a city of soldiers and faith. It was the last great stronghold of the Crusaders in the Holy Land. A fortress city built to withstand sieges. Its stones were not elegant and carved like ours, they were thick, imposing, and practical. As he speaks, you glide past the foundation of an ancient building. The stone blocks are huge and roughly hewn, their surfaces covered in a fine layer of green moss that seems to glow in the ambient moonlight. You can feel the sense of immense age and strength emanating from them, a silent testament to their endurance. You can almost feel the texture under your fingertips, rough, pitted, and cool. Imagine Marco stepping off the ship. The gondolier's voice is soft, inviting you into the scene. The ground beneath his feet would have felt unnaturally still after so long on the swaying deck. He would have been surrounded by a different kind of crowd, not just sailors and merchants, but knights in chainmail, their armor clinking as they walked, pilgrims with weary faces and hopeful eyes, spies and diplomats speaking in hushed tones. The air would have been thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the dust of 1,000 years. The gondola drifts under a low, arched bridge. For a moment, you are enveloped in a pocket of deep shadow and cool air. It feels like passing through a gate in time. When you emerge back into the moonlight, the story continues. They would have seen the great Crusader castles, he murmurs. The fortress of the Knights Hospitaller, a massive, sprawling structure with walls so thick that you could run a cart along the top. He would have walked through cool, stone corridors under vaulted ceilings that echoed with every footstep. He would have touched the narrow arrow slits, designed for defense, and looked out at the same blue sea he had just crossed. This thought comes to you, a quiet reflection on the nature of places, how a city as purpose shapes its very soul. Venice, built for trade, is open, its streets made of water, inviting the world in. Acre, built for war, was walled, defensive, looking outward with suspicion. The very stones hold the memory of the city's intention. It was here, the gondolier says, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, that the Polos received a crucial part of their mission. They carried letters from the Pope to be delivered to the great Khan. It wasn't just a trading voyage anymore. It had become a diplomatic embassy. They bridged between two worlds, two faiths, two empires. And young Marco, a boy of 17, was now a part of it, an emissary. You can feel the weight of that responsibility settling on the young man's shoulders. The transition from a curious boy to a participant in world affairs. His journey was deepening, its purpose becoming grander and more complex. But a fortress, even one as mighty as Acre, is still just a beginning, the gondolier says, his voice trailing off softly. It's to the continent. To get to the Khan, they had to leave the sea behind entirely. They had to turn their backs on the familiar world of ships and ports and venture into the vast, unknown lands of the East. Their journey was about to be replaced by a new, much slower rhythm. The gondola slowly glides to a halt, its nose nudging gently against a set of stone steps in a quiet, forgotten corner of the city. The rocking motion ceases. The silence that follows is profound. It feels as if you too have reached the end of the sea voyage. The next stage of the journey awaits, a journey on solid ground, heralded by a sound that is the very heartbeat of the ancient land routes. The gondola rests, motionless in the water. The abrupt stillness feels significant, a pause between two distinct movements of a grand symphony. After a moment of deep silence, the gondolier gives a gentle push with his oar, and the boat begins to move again, but it feels different, slower, more deliberate. as if acknowledging the change in the story's landscape. From the coast, the gondolier begins, his voice now painting a scene of dry air and dusty roads. The world became vast and horizontal. The sea was gone. In its place, a landscape of rolling hills, ancient mountains, and endless plains. To cross this land, they could not use a ship. They needed a different kind of vessel, a ship of the desert. He lets the words hang in the cool night air. You know what he means. The image forms in your mind, not of wooden sails, but of long legs, a swaying gait, and a silhouette that is unmistakable. They joined a caravan, he says. A long, slow-moving river of people and animals. Merchants, guards, families all traveling together for safety. And at the heart of this river were the camels. Hundreds of them. Great, shaggy beasts with long eyelashes and an expression of profound, weary patience. The gentle rocking of the gondola, which has been your constant companion, now feels like a different kind of sway. You can almost map it onto the slow, side-to-side motion of a camel's walk. That steady, plodding rhythm that can cover immense distances without any sense of hurry. And with the camels, the gondolier murmurs, came a new sound. A sound that defines the ancient trade routes, the sound of the camel bell. He falls silent, and in that silence, you are invited to listen, to imagine a sound that is both musical and melancholic, not a loud, clanging bell, but a soft, dull, rhythmic clonk-kay, sound made by a wooden or metal bell, often filled with a small stone hanging from the neck of each camel. The bells were not for music, he explains softly. They were for practicality. In a sandstorm, or in the dark of night, the sound of the bells kept the caravan together. It was a lifeline, a way to know that you were not alone in the vast emptiness. But it became the rhythm of the journey, a slow, hypnotic metronome that measured the passing of days, weeks, months. You can almost hear it now, a ghost of a sound echoing over the quiet Venetian water, a gentle, percussive beat that gets into your subconscious. Clonk-kay, it's a sound of immense patience, a sound that says we are moving, but there is no rush. The destination will be reached in its own time. You feel your own internal rhythm slowing to match it. The need to get there dissolves, replaced by a sense of just being on the way. Marco would have walked or ridden for 10, 12 hours a day, the gondolier narrates. The sun beating down, the landscape changing with excruciating slowness. He would have learned the discipline of the caravan. To rise before the sun, to pack, to walk, to make camp as the stars appeared. His world, once defined by the sway of a ship, was now defined by the dust of the road and the patient gait of a camel. The gondola glides under another bridge, this one lower and unadorned. As it passes, you notice the smell of damp earth from a small walled garden on the canal's edge. It mixes with the scent of the water, creating a fragrance that is both fresh and ancient. They were entering Persia, he says, ale and of poets and exquisite gardens, but also of harsh deserts on rugged mountains. The journey was not easy. There was the heat, the scarcity of water, the constant threat of bandits. But Marco, in his writings, doesn't dwell on the hardship. He writes about what he sees. He is a man of immense, unwavering curiosity. A quiet thought drifts into your mind. We often see history as a series of big events, battles, coronation as discoveries. But for the people living it, it was mostly just Tuesday, a long hot walk, the taste of gritty water, the comfort of a small fire at night. The true texture of the past is woven from these small, sensory details. He would have listened to the stories of the other travelers around the campfire at night. The gondolier's voice is almost a whisper. Merchants from Baghdad, mystics from the mountains, soldiers of fortune. Each one a thread in the great tapestry of the road. His education was no longer in the counting houses of Venice, but in the heart of the world itself. The sound of the camel bells, that imaginary, hypnotic rhythm, has now fully replaced the sounds of the sea. You are deep inland. The journey has found its new, slow, terrestrial pulse. The gondola continues its own silent passage, a dark thread moving through the moonlit labyrinth. But your mind is far away, in the heart of a Persian desert, lulled by the gentle, eternal music of the caravan. The imaginary sound of the camel bells fades into a gentle hum in your mind, a background rhythm that now feels completely natural. The gondola continues its unhurried passage, a silent observer in a city of stone and water. The gondolier's voice is a soft current, carrying the story forward, deeper into the heart of Asia. The caravan was more than just a mode of transport, he says, his oar barely disturbing the inky surface of the canal. It was a moving city, a fragile ribbon of life stretched across a vast and empty landscape, and the path it followed had a name that sounds like a whisper, like a promise of unimaginable luxury. The Silk Road. The name itself seems to shimmer in the cool night air. It evokes images of rich fabrics, exotic colors, and distant, mysterious lands. But the reality of the road, the gondolier continues, was not luxurious. It was an exercise in extreme patience, a form of moving meditation. You see, the Silk Road was not one single road like a highway. It was a network of shifting trails, a web of paths that branched and reconnected, guided by the location of oases, mountain passes, and a few fortified towns. The gondola turns into an even narrower canal, the moonlight now just a sliver of silver far above. The buildings lean in so closely you could trace the cracks in the ancient plaster with your fingertips. It feels like you are in one of the small, forgotten capillaries of that great trade network. The journey was measured in seasons, not days, he murmurs. You would wait for a mountain pass to be clear of snow. You would wait for the right time to cross a desert, avoiding the worst of the summer heat. You would wait in a dusty caravanserai roadside and for a new caravan to form. Waiting was not a delay. Waiting was part of the journey. You feel this concept of waiting settle over you like a soft blanket. In our world, waiting is an annoyance, a frustration, a moment to be filled with a distraction. But here, in this story, waiting is an active state. It is a time for rest, for repair, for listening. A time to let the dust settle, both literally and metaphorically. Imagine Marco in one of those caravanserai. The gondolier's voice invites you to paint the scene. A large, square courtyard, surrounded by high walls for protection. In the center, a well. The air filled with the sounds of a dozen languages, the smell of cooking fires, and the earthy scent of tired animals. He would sit, perhaps, with his father and uncle, mending a leather strap, or simply watching the flow of life around him. He was learning a new kind of currency, not gold or silver, but patience. The water in the canal is almost perfectly still here, reflecting the dark windows of the sleeping houses. You notice how the slightest movement of the gondola ends out a slow, perfect triple that travels all the way to the stone walls and bounces back, a silent, liquid echo. A quiet, scholarly thought arises. Perhaps the Silk Road's greatest treasure was not the silk it carried, but the ideas it transmitted. Religions, philosophies, technologies, artistic styles. They all traveled with the caravans, passed from person to person in the quiet hours of waiting. The road was a conduit, not just for goods, but for human consciousness. He learned to read the landscape, the gondolier says softly, to find meaning in the shape of a rock formation, to understand the subtle shift in vegetation that signaled the presence of water. He learned to appreciate the small things, the shade of a single lonely tree in the middle of a plain, the taste of a fresh date after days of eating dried rations, the profound, shared silence of watching the sunset with his fellow travelers. This journey, you realize, was stripping him down. It was removing all the layers of his sophisticated Venetian life and teaching him a more fundamental way of being. A way of being that was deeply connected to the earth, to the sky, and to the simple, essential needs of survival. This, the Gondolier concludes, his voice an ear whisper, was the true education of the Silk Road. It was not a race to a destination. It was a slow, deliberate process of transformation. It was teaching him the patience he would need to comprehend the scale and wonder of what lay ahead. It was preparing him for the roof of the world. The gondola emerges from the narrow, tight passage into a slightly more open area where a small stone bridge arches gracefully over the water. The moonlight feels brighter here. It feels like an ascent. The low flat plains of the Silk Road are about to give way to something far more majestic, a place where the air itself is different and the silence is absolute. The gondola pauses for a moment in the open space beneath the moon, the water lapping gently against its hull. The brief sense of expansion, of open air, feels like a deep breath taken before a great exertion. Then, with a slow, powerful stroke of the oar, the gondolier propels the boat forward, back into the winding network of canals. The journey continues its ascent. After months, perhaps even a year of crossing the plains and deserts of Persia and Central Asia, the gondolier's voice drops, taking on a new quality of reverence and awe. The land began to rise, subtly at first, then dramatically. The horizon, once a flat, endless line, became a jagged edge of stone against the sky. They were approaching the Pamir Mountains. You can almost feel the change in the air, even here in the low-lying city of Venice. You imagine the dry, dusty heat of the plains giving way to a cooler, crisper atmosphere. The landscape transforming from shades of brown and ochre to deep greens and the stark, breathtaking gray of rock. The local people called this region the Bamidunya, he says, the foreign words sounding soft and musical in the quiet canal. It means the roof of the world, and for good reason. These are not gentle, rolling hills. They are colossal mountains, the highest in the world, a place where the earth seems to scrape against the heavens. The gondola glides alongside a towering, unadorned wall of an old palazzo. It rises straight out of the water, its surface weathered unstained by centuries of tides. In the moonlight, it looks like a sheer cliff face, and you feel dwarfed by its scale, just as a traveler would feel dwarfed by the immense peaks of the Pamirs. The journey here became vertical, the gondolier murmurs. The slow, swaying gait of the camel was replaced by the sure-footed scramble of mountain ponies and yaks. The path was no longer a wide, dusty track, but a narrow, treacherous ledge carved into the side of a mountain, with a sheer drop of thousands of feet on one side. He pauses, letting the image sink in. There is no sense of fear or peril in his voice. Instead, there is a sense of profound respect for the scale of nature. But the reward for this perilous climb, he continues, was a world of unimaginable purity. The air up there, Marco wrote about it. It is so thin and clean that it feels like you are breathing in pure spirit. The colors are different. The colors are different. The blue of the sky is a deeper, more intense shade than you have ever seen, a dark, vibrant indigo. He stops his rowing for a moment. The gondola drifts, and a complete and utter silence descends. No lapping water, no creaking oar, just stillness. The silence of the high mountains is absolute. He whispers, his voice barely disturbing the quiet. It is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of an empty planet. There are no birds, no insects, just the sound of the wind, a low, mournful sigh as it flows over the high passes, and the sound of your own heartbeat in your ears. It is a silence so profound it feels ancient, like the silence that existed before the world began. In that moment, you try to feel that silence. You let go of the sounds of your room, the hum of the fan, the distant city noises. You try to imagine a quiet so complete that it becomes a presence, a physical thing that you can feel on your skin. A quiet that clears the mind of all its chatter, leaving only a state of pure, simple awareness. A gentle thought arises. A scholar's contemplation does a landscape shape the mind. Few people who live in the high, silent places of the world develop a different kind of consciousness, a consciousness that is more inward, more attuned to the vast, slow rhythms of geology and space. Marco spoke of a high plateau, the gondolier says, his voice resuming its gentle, narrative flow as he begins to row again. A place so high that no birds flew. He said the fires made there did not burn as brightly and did not cook food as well because of the thinness of the air. A cold, otherworldly place. But he also described its stark beauty. The sight of a mountain lake, its water a perfect turquoise mirror reflecting the snow-capped peaks, the feeling of being closer to the stars than to the world of men. The journey up to the roof of the world was not just a physical climb. It was a spiritual one. It was a pilgrimage to a place that was stripped of all life's complexities, a place of elemental power. It was the final barrier, the last great natural challenge that stood between the polos and the fabled land of Cathay. They had crossed the sea, the desert, and now they had crossed the sky itself. The world was about to open up before them on the other side. Having traversed the conceptual peaks of the Pamers, the gondola seems to descend with you, its movement becoming smoother, longer, as if gliding down a gentle, invisible slope. The canals widen slightly, the moonlight pooling on the water's surface like liquid silver. The gondolier's voice shifts, losing the crisp, thin quality of the high-altitude air and taking on a drier, warmer tone. Once they descended from the roof of the world, he begins, they entered a new realm of emptiness. A different kind of emptiness from the sea or the high mountains. They came to the Taklamakan Desert, a name that the local people say means, you can go in, but you can never come out. His voice delivers this ominous name not with a sense of dread, but with a quiet, factual respect, as one would speak of a powerful, sleeping beast. The name itself casts a spell, evoking a landscape of immense scale and profound indifference to human life. This was not a desert of picturesque, rolling sand dunes, he continues, not at first. It was a vast, flat expanse of gravel and rock, the Gobi. A landscape so featureless that you could travel for days and feel as if you hadn't moved at all. The horizon is a perfect 360-degree circle, and you are the tiny, insignificant center of it. The gondola glides into a wide, placid basin of water where several canals converge. The space feels open, exposed. You can see a long way down the moonlit waterways, and the feeling mirrors the vast, unbroken vistas of the desert he describes. The gentle rocking of the boat is the only movement in a world of stillness. The greatest challenge of the Gobi, the gondolier murmurs, was not physical. It was mental. The monotony, the sameness, the sheer overwhelming scale of the emptiness. It plays tricks on the mind. The sun beats down, the heat shimmers on the horizon, and the landscape begins to dissolve. He pauses, letting you feel the shimmering heat, the visual distortion. The caravans would travel at night to avoid the worst of the sun, and it was in the eerie twilight, or the pale light of the moon, that the desert would come alive with ghosts. His voice drops to a conspiratorial whisper. Marco wrote about this. He said that travelers in the desert would sometimes hear voices calling their names. They would sound like the voices of their friends, their fellow travelers. If a man strayed from the path following these voices, he would be lost forever. They were the whispers of the desert. You can almost hear it, a faint, imaginary sound carried on the warm, dry wind, a trick of the air, a product of an exhausted mind, or something more. The idea is not frightening. It is hypnotic, the desert as a living entity with a voice of its own. He also spoke of phantom caravans. The gondolier adds, his are making a soft, swirling sound in the water. Travelers would see, in the distance, the image of a great train of camels and men, and hear the faint sound of their instruments, the beating of drums. They would think they were approaching another group, only to find nothing there. An echo, a mirage, the desert dreaming of itself. This concept, the desert dreaming, is a beautiful one. It transforms the desolate landscape into a place of imagination and delusion. A quiet, scholarly thought arises. Perhaps all so-called empty places, deserts, oceans, tundras, are not empty at all. Perhaps they are simply canvases onto which the human mind, freed from its usual distractions, projects its deepest fears, hopes, and fantasies. They are mirrors of the soul. To cross this landscape, the gondolier explains, required a special kind of focus, a mental fortitude. You had to learn to trust the path, to trust your own senses. You had to learn to live in a world where reality itself seemed thin and unreliable. It was a landscape of illusions, a place where the border between the waking world and the dream world became blurred. You look at the reflections in the Venetian canal, the ancient buildings, the stone bridges, the distant moon. They are all there on the water's surface, a perfect, shimmering replica of the world above. But the slightest ripple, the gentlest breeze, distorts them, melts them, turns them into an abstract dance of light and shadow. The water's surface is its own kind of Gobi Desert, a place of beautiful, unreliable illusions. For a full month, he says, the number settling with a sense of immense weight, they traveled through this whispering, hallucinatory world. A month of heat and dust and ghosts, but they did not get lost. They held to the path, and at the end of that long, slow trial, the desert offered them a reward, a miracle, a vision of impossible beauty. The gondola continues its serene journey, leaving the wide, open basin and slipping once more into a channel that feels more sheltered, more intimate. The transition feels like arriving, like reaching a safe harbor after a long and challenging crossing. The gondolier's voice softens, taking on the quality of someone describing a cherished and beautiful secret. After the long trial of the Gobi, he says, after weeks of dust and shimmering heat and phantom sounds, the landscape began to change. On the horizon, a series of immense, sculpted shapes began to appear. They were mountains of rock. They were mountains of rock. You can picture them perfectly. The great dunes of the Taklamakan, not chaotic piles, but gracefully curved, sculptural forms shaped by 1,000 years of wind. Their crests are sharp lines drawn against the deep blue sky, their colors shifting with the light from pale gold to deep, warm apricot. The caravan's path led them between these colossal, silent waves of sand. The gondolier continues. And there, nestled in a small valley, protected by the dunes, was a sight that must have seemed like a dream. A crescent-shaped lake, a perfect sliver of the moon, dropped from the sky and filled with the clearest, purest water. The name comes to your mind even before he says it. Wan, the Crescent Lake. A place of legend, a jewel of the desert. Imagine the relief, he murmurs, his voice filled with a sense of gentle wonder. After a month in the driest place on earth, to see water, not a muddy, brackish well, but a deep, clear, living lake, the air around it was different, cooler. You could smell the moisture, the sand of the reeds that grew along its banks. The sound of the wind was replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves from a few poplar trees, their existent self. The gondola you are in glides past a small private garden, overflowing its stone walls. The sweet, heavy scent of night blooming flowers drifts across the water, a sudden intoxicating perfume that fills the air. It's a sensory surprise, a moment of unexpected life and beauty. Much like the oasis in the story, Marco would have knelt at the water's edge, the gondolier narrates softly. He would have seen his own reflection, his face and unweathered by the journey, looking back at him from the perfectly still surface. He would have plunged his hands into the cool, clean water, feeling its life-giving touch. In that moment, the hardships of the desert would have melted away, washed clean by this impossible gift. You trail your own fingers in the Venetian canal. The water is cool and silky, and the simple sensation connects you across centuries and continents to that moment of profound, simple gratitude. The gratitude for water. A quiet thought emerges, a gentle piece of knowledge. Crescent Lake has existed for at least 2,000 years, a seemingly impossible geological feature. Scientists have studied the unique aerodynamics of the surrounding dunes, how the wind blows the sand around the oasis rather than into it, preserving it in a delicate, natural equilibrium. It is not just a miracle, it is a masterpiece of natural engineering. A perfect, self-sustaining system. Beside the lake, the gondolier adds, was a small temple, its curved roofs and painted pavilions, a stark and beautiful contrast to the endless sand. A place to rest the body and the soul. Travelers for centuries had stopped here, leaving their own small offerings of thanks. It was a sacred place, not because of any particular god worshipped there, but because of what it represented: hope, resilience, the promise that even in the most desolate of places, life and beauty can flourish. The idea of the oasis settles deep within you. It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? The idea that within every one of us, even after long periods of difficulty or emotional drought, there exists a small, protected place of inner peace and replenishment, a place we can return to find clarity undressed. They stayed for a time at the oasis, the gondolier says, his voice beginning to move the story forward again. They let their animals drink their fill, they replenished their supplies, they rested their weary minds. The Crescent Lake was a turning point. It was the end of the great desert crossing. They had survived the trial by fire and sand. They were now on the very edge of Cathay. The domain of the Great Khan was near. The scent of a new world was on the wind. The gondola makes a final slow turn, and ahead of you, you can see the faint lights of a more populated area, their glow reflecting softly on the water. It feels like you are approaching a destination. The wilderness is behind you. The city awaits. The feeling of arrival grows stronger as the gondola glides forward. The canals seem a little wider, the houses a little grander, their windows hinting at a life within, even in sleep. You are moving from the wilderness of the story into the realm of civilization. The gondolier's voice reflects this change, taking on a tone of anticipation and grandeur. Leaving the crescent lake behind, he begins. The Polos were now in a different land. The landscape was no longer empty. They began to see signs of organized life on a massive scale. Well-maintained roads, large, prosperous-looking farmsteads. They were in the territory of the great Khan, and they could feel the power and order of his empire everywhere. You float past a point where a smaller canal feeds into the one you are on. The meeting of the waters creates a series of slow, swirling eddies on the surface, a miniature vortex of intersecting currents. It feels like a metaphor for the meeting of cultures that the Polos were about to experience. After several more weeks of travel, the gondolier continues. They were told they were approaching the Khan's summer capital, his pleasure dome, a city built for the summer months to escape the heat of his main capital, Kublai Khan. The city was called Xanadu. He pronounces the name slowly, letting it hang in the air. Xanadu, a name that has become synonymous with idyllic, opulent beauty, thanks in no small part to a famous poem inspired by Marco's own descriptions. Marco did not see a glittering city of gold at first. The gondolier clarifies, his voice soft and grounded in reality. The first thing he saw would have been the wall. A great, encircling wall of packed earth, stretching for miles in each direction. It wasn't built for defense like the walls of Acre. It was a wall to enclose a paradise, a wall to separate the Khan's world from the ordinary one. Up ahead, your gondola is approaching a magnificent, wide bridge. Its arch is high and graceful, and its stone is a pale, creamy white that seems to glow in the moonlight. Passing under it feels like passing through a grand, ceremonial gate. Imagine them, this small band of weary travelers, he says, as you glide into the shadow of the bridge. After 3.5 years of journeying, after crossing seas, deserts, and the highest mountains on earth, they stand before the gate of Xanadu. What must that have felt like the end of a pilgrimage, the culmination of a dream that began so long ago in a noisy Venetian port. The feeling is one of profound arrival. You imagine the dust-caked travelers, their clothes worn, their faces weathered, looking up at the gatehouse. The guards would have been different from any they had ever seen. Mongolian warriors, their faces stern, their armor exotic. The language strange to their ears. They were crossing a threshold, not just into a city, but into a new universe. When the gates opened for them, the gondolier's voice fills with a sense of wonder. It was not a crowded city they saw. It was a park, a vast manicured park filled with meadows, groves of trees, and sparkling streams. There were herds of deer and gazelle grazing peacefully, birds of every color in the trees. It was an artificial Eden crafted by the most powerful man in the world for his own delight. A gentle, scholarly thought arises in your mind. The concept of a pleasure garden, a paradise on earth, is an ancient Persian idea from which our word paradise comes. Kublai Khan, a Mongol ruler of China, was creating his own version of this idea, blending cultures and traditions on a scale that was unprecedented. And in the center of this park, the gondolier says, his voice dropping to a hush, was the palace. But it was not a palace of stone, not here, in the summer capital. It was made of something else, something lighter, more magical. He pauses, building the anticipation. It was a palace made of bamboo, a huge, intricate structure of polished cane, bound together with silk cords. It was designed to be portable. At the end of every summer, the entire palace could be taken apart piece by piece and moved. A palace that could disappear. The image is breathtaking. A building as large and grand as a European castle, yet as light and ephemeral as a dream. It defies all of Marco's and your own expectations of what a palace should be. It is a structure of pure imagination. They would have seen it from a distance at first. He whispers, gleaming in the sun, its gilded roof tiles shining. It would have looked like something from a fairy tale. As they drew closer, they would have seen the fine details, the intricate carvings in the bamboo, the bright silk banners fluttering in the breeze. They had arrived. They were about to step into the court of Kublai Khan. The gondola has now passed under the great bridge and is gliding into a calm, majestic stretch of canal, lined with some of the most beautiful and serene palazzos of Venice. The scene is one of quiet grandeur, a fitting reflection for the approach to the heart of a great and fabled empire. The gondola moves now with a stately, almost reverent slowness. It has entered a stretch of canal that feels like a royal procession route, flanked by silent, magnificent buildings whose reflections tremble in the moonlit water. The gondolier's voice is hushed, as if he too were entering a sacred space, leading you from the outer gardens of Xanadu into the very heart of the Khan's presence. Stepping inside the bamboo palace, he says softly, would have been like stepping into another world. The air inside would have been cool and fragrant, scented with incense and the subtle perfume of polished wood. Light would have filtered through intricate latticework, creating shifting, dappled patterns on the floor, much like the moonlight on the water here. You look at the shimmering patterns dancing on the canal's surface, a living mosaic of light, and you can vividly picture the interior of that ephemeral palace. It would not have been dark and heavy like a stone castle, but light, airy, and alive. The inside was a vast, open hall. The gondolier continues, his voice painting the scene with careful strokes. The roof was held up by columns of vermilion lacquered wood, carved with dragons and birds. The walls were not walls at all, but screens of silk, painted with delicate landscapes, misty mountains, tranquil rivers, birds perched on blossoming branches. It was a palace designed to bring the beauty of the outside world within. The sheer artistry of it is astounding. A place of immense power, expressed not through brute force and heavy stone, but through elegance, beauty, and a deep appreciation for nature. And there, at the far end of the hall, upon a raised dais, sat the great Khan himself, Kublai, grandson of Genghis Khan. The gondolier's voice holds a deep respect. He would not have been a young man. He would have been in his 60s, his face a testament to a life of command and conquest. Yet his eyes, Marco wrote, were intelligent and curious. You imagine the scene from Marco's perspective. A young Venetian merchant standing in the heart of this impossible bamboo palace before the most powerful ruler on the planet. The silence would have been profound, broken only by the faintest rustle of silk garments. The courtiers, hundreds of them, would have been arranged in perfect, silent rows, their colorful robes a sea of vibrant hues. The polos approached, the gondolier narrates, his voice an ear whisper. They knelt, as was the custom, showing their deep respect. They did not speak first. In the court of the Khan, one waited for the Khan to speak. Imagine the tension of that silence. The culmination of a 3.5-year journey, hanging in that single, silent moment. The gondola you are in drifts past its arched palazzo, its ornate facade a tapestry of Gothic arches and delicate stone carvings. It speaks of a different kind of power of wealth and trade, but the silent, absolute authority of the Khan's court feels like something else entirely. A quiet, scholarly thought drifts into your mind. This was a pivotal moment in history, a direct meeting between two vastly different worlds. The Polos were not just merchants, they were living conduits of information. The knowledge they would bring back about the geography, culture, and technology of the East would fundamentally alter Europe's understanding of the world, and the knowledge they brought to the Khan about their own distant lands would, in turn, expand his. The Khan's voice, when he spoke, would have been calm, measured. The gondolier says, he was a man accustomed to having his every word obeyed. He would have asked them about their journey, about their kings, their pope, their customs. He was a man with an insatiable curiosity, a collector not just of treasures, but of knowledge. And he was particularly interested in young Marco. The gondolier adds, a note of warmth in his voice. He saw in the young man a sharp-minded and observant eye. He saw someone who didn't just look, but saw someone who paid attention to the details. This was a rare and valuable quality. The scene is one of quiet, intense observation. No grand speeches, no dramatic proclamations. Just a powerful, intelligent ruler carefully assessing these strange visitors from the other side of the world. The immense power of the Khan was not expressed in shouting or dramatic gestures, but in this deep, confident stillness. This was only the beginning of their time there, the gondolier says. As the gondola slowly glides past the grand facade and continues down the quiet, moonlit canal, Marco would go on to serve the Khan for 17 years. He would become his eyes and ears, his trusted envoy to the farthest corners of his vast empire. But this first meeting, in this magical, disappearing palace, this was the moment his life truly changed. He was no longer just a traveler. The story has reached a peak of quiet grandeur, a moment of arrival that is also a new beginning. The gondola turns, leaving the grand, palazzo-lined canal and entering a waterway that feels more intimate, more humble. The shift is subtle but distinct. It's as if you've left the official, ceremonial part of the Khan's world and are being invited into a more private, personal space. The gondolier's voice softens, becoming warmer and more companionable. While the bamboo palace of Xanadu was a place of breathtaking grandeur, he says, it was not the only world Marco came to know. The Khan and his court were, at their heart, Mongols, people of the grasslands, and they carried their traditions with them. Even within the sophisticated culture of China they now ruled. You glide past a small, quiet square, a campo where a few simple boats are moored, bobbing gently in the water. The scene has a rustic, domestic quality that perfectly matches the turn in the story. Sometimes the gondolier continues. The Khan would retreat from the formality of the palace. He would hold court in a traditional Mongol tent, a yurt set up in the vast parks of his estate. We call them GER, he says the word with a quiet familiarity. These were not simple tents. They were large, ornate structures, big enough to hold hundreds of people, lined with rich carpets and furs. But their essence was that of the steppe, portable, practical, and connected to the earth. You can almost feel the change in atmosphere. The cool, airy elegance of the bamboo palace gives way to a cozier, more grounded feeling. You imagine stepping from the dewy grass of the park into one of these great yurts. The air inside would be warmer, filled with the scent of wool, leather, and wood smoke from a central fire. It was in these more intimate settings The gondolier murmurs that Marco would have experienced the true hospitality of the Mongols, and at the heart of that hospitality was a drink. Not wine like in Venice or water from a clear spring. It was something unique to the grasslands. He pauses, and you can almost smell it on the cool night air, a scent that is savory, warm, and comforting. Suti, he says the name softly. Salty milk tea. It may not sound appealing to our Venetian palates, but for the people of the steppe, it is life itself. It is food and drink in one, a source of warmth, hydration, and vital nutrients in a harsh landscape. You imagine a bowl of this tea being offered to Marco. A simple, earthenware or wooden bowl, held into hands as a sign of respect. He would have seen the steam rising from its surface, carrying that unfamiliar, buttery, and slightly salty aroma. It's made by boiling black tea used in milk, the gondolier explains, his voice taking on the quiet authority of a chef sharing a secret recipe. With a pinch of salt, sometimes, they would add a spoonful of butter or toasted millet. To a weary traveler, a bowl of hot, salty tea is more precious than gold. It restores your strength. It settles in your stomach like a warm blanket. It is a gesture that says, "You are welcome here." The gondola glides so smoothly that the water seems to be a solid, polished surface of black glass. You notice a single, fallen leaf floating on it, a tiny, perfect vessel on a vast, dark sea. A quiet, sensory piece of knowledge comes to you. The practice of adding butter or salt to tea is common in many high-altitude or nomadic cultures, like in Tibetan Mongolia. The fat and salt are crucial for replenishing energy, electrolytes lost in harsh, dry climates. It's a perfect example of how cuisine is not just about taste, but about deep, practical wisdom and adaptation to one's environment. To accept that bowl of tea, the gondolier continues, to drink it, was to accept a bond of fellowship. It was a language without words. Marco, the intelligent observer, would have understood this instantly. He would have cradled the warm bowl in his hands, felt its heat seep into his palms, and taken a sip. He would have tasted the salt, the rich milk, the earthy bitterness of the tea. A taste of the grasslands, a taste of his new home. This simple, sensory act feels incredibly profound. It's a moment of connection that transcends the immense cultural gap between the Venetian merchant and the Mongol courtiers. It's a reminder that beneath all the layers of language, custom, and belief, there are fundamental human experiences that we all share: the comfort of warmth, the nourishment of food, the grace of hospitality. In that yurt, with the scent of burning juniper in the air and the taste of salty tea on his tongue, the gondolier concludes, Marco was not just an envoy from a foreign land. He was a guest. He was a guest. He was part of the circle. This was a different kind of power from the silent authority of the throne room. This was the power of connection, of shared humanity. A lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The gondola continues its journey through the quieter, more contemplative canals. The story has moved from the sensory experience of taste and warmth into the realm of ideas. The gondolier's voice becomes laced with a sense of intellectual wonder, the tone of a person describing a clever and beautiful piece of magic. Marco served the Khan for 17 years, he says, the number itself a testament to the deep trust that had formed between the two men. The Khan sent him on missions to the farthest reaches of his empire, to the jungles of the south, to the borders of India, to provinces that no European had ever laid eyes on. He was the Khan's perfect emissary because he had an insatiably curious mind and a memory for every detail. You glide past a dark, narrow passageway, so to port go that tunnels through a building. As you pass under it, the world is momentarily reduced to shadow and the amplified sound of the oar in the water. It feels like a passage into a secret, a glimpse into something hidden. And during these travels, the gondolier continues as you emerge back into the moonlight. Marco encountered wonders that would have been completely unbelievable to anyone in Venice. He saw beasts and customs and technologies that were centuries ahead of what he knew. But there was one thing, one particular innovation, that seemed to fascinate him more than any other. It was something he described with a kind of baffled awe. It was the Khan's money. He lets the statement settle. Money. It seemed so mundane, but what Marco saw was anything but. In Venice, in all of Europe, the gondolier explains, wealth was something heavy. It was gold, silver, bronze. It had intrinsic value. You could feel its weight in your hand. It was real, solid, tangible. He taps his oar lightly on the side of the gondola, a soft thump that emphasizes the idea of physical substance. But the great Khan, he says, his voice dropping to a near whisper, had performed a kind of alchemy. He had figured out how to make money out of a tree. The idea is so simple, yet so revolutionary. You imagine Marco trying to explain this concept back home, the sheer absurdity of it to his fellow merchants. He described the process in detail. The gondolier narrates, clearly fascinated by the memory of Marco's text. He said they take the inner bark of the mulberry tree, the thin, fibrous layer. They pound it, mash it, and press it into sheets of black paper. Then, they cut this paper into different sizes, each one representing a different value. You can almost see it. The dark, fibrous paper, rougher than the fine parchment of Europe, yet holding an immense, invisible power. And then came the most important part, he adds. Each piece of paper was stamped with the official seal of the great Khan. That seal, that small reed mark, was what gave the paper its value. It was a promise, a decree. The Khan's mark transformed a worthless piece of bark into a representation of wealth. It was not money in itself, it was the idea of money. A profound, scholarly thought floats up in your mind. This was one of the world's first successful systems of fiat currency. Its value was based not on the material it was made from, but on the trust and authority of the government that issued it. It's the very same principle that governs almost all of our money today, a system so commonplace we rarely stop to consider its abstract, almost magical nature. Marco was witnessing the birth of modern economics. He wrote about how this paper money was accepted everywhere in the Khan's lands. The gondolier says you could use it to buy anything: pearls, spices, horses, houses, and if a note became worn or torn, you could take it to the mint and exchange it for a new one. It was a perfect closed system. And Marco, the Venetian merchant, a man who understood the hard reality of gold ducats, was simply astounded by the elegance and power of it. He called it a new and admirable artifice. The gondola slides past a small, secluded courtyard where an old stone wellhead sits in the center. It speaks of an older time, a time of drawing real water, of dealing in things that were physically present. The contrast with the abstract nature of paper money is striking. This is what made the Khan's empire so powerful, the gondolier concludes. It was his ideas, the ability to control his vast domain not just with force, but with systems, with trust, with a piece of paper, stamped with his promise. It was a form of magic, and Marco was one of the first Westerners to ever witness the trick. The boat continues to drift, leaving you to ponder this quiet, intellectual miracle, a secret of governance and trust hidden within a simple piece of mulberry bark. The gondola, having navigated the realm of abstract ideas, now seems to seek a more familiar, tangible landscape. It turns into a canal that feels different yet again. It's quieter, lined with more modest houses whose lower floors show the deep green waterline of high tide. The air smells richer, more of earth and vegetation than of salt and stone. The gondolier's voice takes on a tone of warmth and fond recognition. While Marco served the Khan, his travels took him to every corner of the vast empire. He begins the gentle rocking of the boat, a soothing, constant rhythm. He saw the frozen lands of the north and the hot, dense jungles of the south. But there was one region that must have felt, to him, like a strange and beautiful echo of his own home. He pauses, letting you wonder, what could possibly remind a Venetian of his city in the heart of 13th century China? He traveled south to the lands of the former Song dynasty. The gondolier continues. And he came to the region around the great Yangtze River, a land of incredible fertility and wealth. But what was most remarkable was the landscape itself. It was a world woven together by water. The idea is immediately resonant. You look over the side of the gondola at the dark waters sliding by, and you feel the connection instantly. He described all and crisscrossed by countless rivers and canals. The gondolier says, his voice painting a lush green picture. Canals so large and wide that they were like major highways, bustling with barges carrying rice, silk, and porcelain. The fields were green, the air was humid and warm, and the people, they lived their lives on the water, much as we do here. You can imagine Marco's sense of wonder and déjà vu. To travel for years across half the world, through landscapes so alien they might as well have been another planet, only to find a place that felt, in its soul, so familiar. He would have seen families living on their boats, the gondolier murmurs, children playing on the decks, women washing clothes in the river, fishermen casting their nets. The towns and cities were not built along roads, but along canals. Goods were not moved by cart, but by boat. The primary sound was not the clatter of hooves, but the lapping of water and the rhythmic creak of an oar. The gondola you are in makes a soft creaking sound as the oar pivots in the four-cola. The sound, which has been your constant companion all night, suddenly takes on a new layer of meaning. It is a sound that connects this moment, in this boat, in this city, with that distant Chinese water world that Marco witnessed 7 centuries ago. The architecture was different, of course, he adds. The curved tile roofs of the pagodas, the delicate wooden balconies overhanging the water. But the spirit of the place, a life dictated by the flow of water, by the need for bridges, by the constant presence of boats, he must have felt a profound kinship with it. It was like finding a long-lost cousin on the other side of the world. A quiet, comparative thought drifts into your mind. Venice was a city born of necessity, its canals a defense and a practicality in a marshy lagoon. The water towns of Jiangnan, in southern China, were born of abundance, their canals an irrigation system for fertile rice paddies, a natural network for transport. One was a defiance of nature, the other a partnership with it. Yet both resulted in a similar, beautiful way of life. He would have tasted the food, the gondolier says, his voice hinting at new sensory delights. Delicate freshwater fish, steamed dumplings, vegetables so fresh they tasted of the morning dew. The flavors were different from the bold, sun-drenched tastes of the Mediterranean, but they were no less exquisite, subtler perhaps, more refined. The gondola glides under a very small, simple bridge, little more than a stone slab connecting to houses. It speaks of a life lived on an intimate, human scale, a life connected directly to one's neighbors across a small ribbon of water. This experience, the gondolier concludes, must have been one of the most comforting of his long exile. It showed him that for all the world's vastness and variety, there are certain patterns that repeat, certain ways of life that emerge when humans and water decide to live together. It was a reminder that even in the most foreign of lands, you can sometimes find a reflection of home. A reflection that doesn't make you miss your home more, but makes the world feel a less strange, a little more connected. The journey continues, but now with a newfound sense of familiarity, the story having found a mirror of Venice in the most unexpected of places. The gondola continues its serene drift, the water of the canal so still it perfectly mirrors the moonlit facades of the ancient buildings. The feeling of the familiar, of the echoed home lingers in the air. The gondolier's voice builds upon this theme, taking you to the very heart of that Chinese water world, a city that Marco Polo described with breathless admiration. In the heart of this Jiangnan, the gondolier says, pronouncing the Chinese name with a soft reverence, Marco visited a city that, to him, was the most magnificent in the entire world. A city so beautiful, so wealthy, and so vast that it defied belief. He called it Kinsei, which was his rendering of the local name, Hang House. But he gave it another title, a title that speaks to his awe. He called it the City of Heaven. The name hangs in the air, a testament to the city's profound impact on the Venetian traveler. You imagine what it must have taken to impress a man who grew up surrounded by the unique beauty of Venice. If Jiangnan was a cousin to Venice, the gondolier continues, then Hang House was its glorious, impossibly grand twin. He wrote that the city had 12,000 bridges. He says the number slowly, letting the sheer, delightful exaggeration sink in. Of course, this was a storyteller's flourish, but it conveys the truth of the city's spirit. It was a place defined by its bridges. Bridges of stone, bridges of wood, and bridges so small and delicate they seem to be made for spirits, not for man. Your own gondola is approaching another bridge. This one is older, more weathered than the others. Its arch is a perfect, graceful semicircle, and you can see how its reflection in the still water below completes the circle, creating a perfect moon gate of stone and light. It's a classic image from Chinese art, found here by chance in the heart of Venice. He described the city's main feature. The gondolier murmurs, a vast, beautiful lake right in its center, the West Lake. It was surrounded by the palaces of nobles and wealthy merchants, and dotted with islands, each with its own beautiful pavilions and gardens. The people of the city would take pleasure cruises on the lake, in barges decorated with painted silks, listening to music and poetry. The scene he paints is one not just of wealth, but of profound aesthetic sensibility. A culture that valued beauty, leisure, and the appreciation of nature as the highest pursuits. It was a city built for pleasure as much as for commerce. And the bridges, he says, returning to his favorite detail. He was mesmerized by them. He saw them not just as practical structures, but as works of art. Each one was different. Some were steep, like a dragon's back. Others were flat and long, with covered walkways to provide shade. They were the threads that stitched the city together, connecting neighborhoods, markets, and temples. A gentle, thoughtful comparison comes to mind. In Venice, the bridges are often functional, even utilitarian, their beauty arising from their necessity. In Hang House, as Marco described it, the bridges seem to be an occasion for artistry, a chance to add yet another layer of beauty to an already beautiful landscape. One was engineering that becomes art, the other was art that serves as engineering. Imagine Marco on a boat, much like this one. The gondolier's voice is soft, almost hypnotic, gliding under those thousands of bridges, each one a new frame for the view ahead, looking up at the carved stone, at the happy crowds passing overhead. He, a man from the world's other great city of bridges, was seeing his own home's defining feature amplified, multiplied, and transformed into something new and wondrous. The gondola passes under the stone arch. The sound of the water deepens for a moment, the air grows cooler. You look up at the ancient, moss-flecked stones just inches above your head. You can feel the history, the immense weight of time, held within that graceful curve. For Marco, the gondolier concludes as you emerge back into the moonlight, Hang House was proof that the world was infinitely more vast and more wonderful. It wasn't just bigger or richer. It was differently beautiful. It was a paradise built by human hands, in perfect harmony with the water that gave it life. It was the highest point of his travels, the jewel of the East, a memory of celestial beauty that he would carry in his heart for the rest of his days. Even when he was back here, gliding through our own beloved, but perhaps a little less heavenly, canals. The story lingers on this peak of urban beauty, a dream of a perfect city, reflected in the quiet waters of the Venetian night. The gondola continues its unhurried voyage, leaving the dream of Hang House as celestial bridges behind. The canals become narrower again, more functional, like the working arteries of the city. The gondolier's voice shifts from the grandeur of cities to the quiet, focused world of the artisan. The story becomes about things you can hold in your hand. The wealth of the Khan's empire was not just in its scale or its paper money. He begins, his tone becoming more intimate, more focused. It was in the skill of its craftsmen. Marco, as a merchant's son, had a deep appreciation for things that were beautifully made, and in his travels he encountered a substance that, to him, was like a form of white magic. We know it as porcelain. The word itself feels smooth and cool on the tongue. You can almost feel the substance it describes, dense, delicate, and flawless. In Europe, the gondolier explains, our pottery was earthenware, thick, heavy, and porous, useful for a jug or a cooking pot, but not something of great beauty. The nobles might have dishes of silver or pewter, but what Marco saw in China was something else entirely. The gondola glides past the back of what might have been a workshop. Even in the darkness, you can see old barrels and crates stacked against the wall, hinting at a life of making and doing. He journeyed to a city called Jingdekhan. The gondolier says the name carefully. This was not a city of poets or pleasure barges. This was a city of fire and clay, a city that for 1,000 years had been dedicated to one single, perfect craft, the making of porcelain. At night, the sky above the city would have glowed from the heat of hundreds of kilns, a constellation of man-made stars. The image is powerful, a whole city humming with a single, focused purpose, an industrial hub from the 13th century, dedicated not to forging weapons but to creating objects of delicate beauty. He described the process. The gondolier's voice is filled with the wonder of a person explaining a complex art. How they took a special kind of white clay, the kaolin and a powdered stone. The pedants see they mixed them with water to create a fine, smooth paste. This paste was then shaped on a potter's wheel, with a skill that was mesmerizing to watch. You can almost see it, the lump of wet, gray clay on the wheel and the potter's hands, steady and sure, coaxing it upwards, thinning its walls, creating a vessel of impossible lightness and perfect symmetry, a process that is both earth-bound and transcendent. But the real magic, he continues, happened in the fire. The pieces were glazed and then placed in the kiln, and fired at a temperature so high it would melt steel, hotter than any furnace in Europe could achieve. For days they would bake in this intense, controlled inferno. A quiet, tactile piece of knowledge surfaces. The extreme heat is what causes the clay and stone to to fuse and become glass-like. This is what gives porcelain its unique combination of hardness, translucent, and its inability to be stained. It is a substance transformed, born of elemental forces. And when the pieces were finally taken from the cooled kiln, the gondolier's voices hushed. They were changed. The dull clay had become a brilliant, luminous white. The glaze had become a smooth, hard shell of pure glass. When you tapped it, it would ring with a clear, musical note. You imagine Marco holding a small porcelain bowl for the first time. He, who is used to the heft of pottery or the gleam of metal, would have been struck by its lightness. He would have held it up to the light and seen the sun glow faintly through its thin walls. And he would have felt its surface so impossibly smooth, so cool to the touch. It would have felt less like something made by human hands and more like something that had simply occurred in nature, like a pearl or a polished stone. He called it porcellana. The gondolier explains, the old Italian word for a quarry shell, because the fine, white, glossy surface reminded him of one. He knew, instantly, the value of this material. A cup made from this white gold was worth more than a cup made of actual gold in the markets of the West. It was the ultimate luxury, a symbol of a civilization that had mastered the very elements of the earth. The gondola drifts silently. The story of the porcelain of this quiet, perfect object feels like a moment of pure, focused calm. It's a reminder that history is not just made by armies and emperors, but by the quiet, patient, and masterful hands of anonymous artisans who, through generations of trial and error, achieved a kind of perfection. A perfection that could be held, admired, and cherished, a small, cool vessel of peace in a chaotic world. Having contemplated the cool, smooth perfection of porcelain, the gondola seems to drift into a warmer, more aromatic current of the story. The air in the Venetian canal, already rich with the scent of damp stone and water, now seems to carry imaginary fragrances from a distant land. The gondolier's voice becomes softer, more suffused with the sensory richness he is about to describe. The treasures of the East were not all things you could see or touch. He begins, his oar making a gentle, rhythmic splash. Some of the most valuable treasures were the ones you could smell. Marco, as a Venetian, came from the heart of the European spice trade. He knew the value of pepper, of cloves. But in the markets of Cathay, he encountered a world of aromas that was infinitely richer and more complex than anything he had ever known. The gondola glides past a darkened restaurant, its tables and chairs neatly stacked on the fondamenta, the walkway beside the canal. You can still smell the faint, ghostly scent of garlic and herbs from the day's cooking, a gentle reminder of how powerfully scent is tied to place and memory. He would have walked through the market stalls of a city like Hanghouse or Konbali Q. The gondolier narrates, his voice painting a vibrant scene. Imagine the sights and sounds, but now focus on the smells. He would have passed pyramids of spices, their colors as rich as jewels, the deep rusty red of chili powders, the bright, sunny yellow of turmeric, the earthy brown of cumin. You can almost feel your senses being awakened by his description. You imagine the dry, dusty, and pungent air of the market, a complex perfume that is both stimulating and deeply comforting. He would have smelled the sweet, warm, almost woody scent of cinnamon bark rolled into tight quills, he murmurs, and the sharp, medicinal, and powerful aroma of star anise with its beautiful, eight-pointed shape. These were not just flavorings, they were medicines, perfumes, and preservatives. Their value was immense. He pauses, allowing these fragrances to steep in your imagination. He described plants we now take for granted. Ginger with its spicy, citrusy heat. Nutmeg and mace, two different spices from the same fruit, one warm and sweet, the other delicate and floral. He was creating a vocabulary of scent for Europe that had never experienced such things. A quiet, sensory piece of information comes to mind. Our sense of smell is the one most directly linked to the parts of our brain that process memory and emotion. A single, forgotten scent can trigger a flood of vivid, detailed memories from long ago. For Marco, the scents of the East would have been inextricably linked to the memories of his travels, a fragrant diary of his adventures. Think of the contrast, the gondolier says softly. European cooking of the time was simple, often just the taste of the meat or fish with salt. Spices were a luxury used by the very rich to show off their wealth, but the variety was limited. What Marco was experiencing was a culinary art form where flavor was built in layers, where sweet, sour, salty, and spicy were balanced in perfect harmony. It was a completely different philosophy of food. The gondola makes a slow, deliberate turn, the water swirling in a lazy spiral behind it. The motion is like stirring a pot, slowly blending ingredients together. And it wasn't just the dry spices he adds, it was the fresh aromas. The powerful, almost aggressive scent of fresh coriander, the clean, green smell of lemongrass, the strange, pungent, and utterly unique odor of fermented fish sauce, a smell that is challenging at first, but is the secret to the deep, savory flavor of so much of the region's food. He is not just listing ingredients. He is evoking an entire sensory world, a world where flavor was bold, complex, and celebrated. For a merchant, every one of these scents was also the smell of money, of potential profit. But for the traveler, for the man who was experiencing them for the first time, they were simply a source of pure, unadulterated wonder. These scents, the gondolier concludes, his voice a gentle whisper, would have clung to his clothes, to his hair, to the goods he brought back. When his father and uncle finally returned to Venice after all those years, people said they looked like Tarzan could barely speak their own language. But imagine how they must have smelled. They would have carried the perfume of another world with them, the scent of adventure, the undeniable, aromatic proof that they had been somewhere extraordinary. The story hangs on this fragrant note, a reminder that the most powerful memories are often the ones we can't see or touch, but can only breathe in. The imaginary scents of the Eastern market slowly fade, replaced once again by the clean, cool fragrance of the Venetian night. The gondola seems to pick up a gentle, steady pace, as if it has a clear destination in mind. A feeling of conclusion, of turning for home, settles over the story. The gondolier's voice takes on a new tone, one of wistful reflection in the slow, bittersweet process of farewell. 17 years, he says, the words imbued with the weight of time. Marco lived in the Khan's service for 17 years. He arrived as a boy of 17 and was now a man in his mid-30s. He had spent more of his adult life in Cathay than he had in Venice, but a longing for home, a pull that every traveler feels eventually, began to grow in his heart. You glide past a single illuminated window, high up in an old palazzo. The warm yellow light is a beacon in the darkness, a symbol of home, of a safe and comfortable place to return to at the end of a long day or a long journey. The great Khan was old now, the gondolier continues, and he had grown very fond of the Polos. He did not want them to leave. They were his connection to a world he would never see, his trusted and clever servants. But they knew that when the old Khan died, his successors might not look upon them with such favor. It was time to go. The decision to leave, you reflect, can be as momentous as the decision to depart in the first place. It is its own kind of journey, one filled with complex emotions, gratitude for the experiences had, sadness at leaving a place that has become a second home, and the deep, instinctual pull towards one's own root. And so, the journey comes full circle. It began with a sea voyage from west to east, and now it would end with one from east to west. They set sail from the great port of Quanshu in southern China. The gondolier's voice paints a scene of departure once more. But this was not like the small ship that carried Marco from Venice. This was a grand fleet, 14 great Chinese junks with 4 masts each and crews of hundreds. They were floating palaces, laden with the treasures accumulated over 2 decades and the dowry of the princess. You imagine the sight. The bustling, colorful port, the immense ships with their distinctive, battened sails, the air filled with the sounds of gongs and the shouts of sailors. For Marco, it must have been a moment of profound significance. He was finally, truly, on his way home, but the journey would be anything but simple. The voyage was long and arduous, the gondolier murmurs. It took them 2 years. They sailed across the South China Sea, through the Strait of Malacca, across the Indian Ocean. They were battered by monsoons. They were becalmed for weeks in the sweltering heat. Many of the crew, more than 600 men, were lost to storms and disease. The gentle, predictable rocking of your gondola is a stark contrast to the violent, unpredictable motion of a junk caught in a monsoon. You feel a deep sense of safety and peace in your own journey, which makes the peril of theirs feel both distant and poignant. A quiet, scholarly thought comes to you. This final voyage of the Polos became one of the most detailed accounts of the maritime routes of Asia in the 13th century. From the coasts of Vietnam and Sumatra to the shores of India and Sri Lanka, Marco's meticulous observations provided a map for future generations of sailors and explorers. Even in his homecoming, he was still a chronicler. Through it all, the gondolier says, his voice filled with a quiet admiration, they protected the princess. They endured. And they watched as the world they had known for so long slowly slipped away. The faces of the people changed, the languages, the very stars in the sky. They were sailing back into their own time, their own world. When they finally arrived in Persia, he continues, they delivered the princess safely to her new home. But they learned that their old protector, the great Kublai Khan, had died while they were at sea. Their decision to leave had been the right one. The world they had left was already gone. The gondola glides under a final low bridge and emerges into a wider stretch of water that feels familiar. You can see the small, forgotten pier where your journey began, glimmering in the distance. The long, slow voyage is nearing its end. The tales of the fantastic East are drawing to a close, and the reality of the Venetian canals is taking over completely. The gondola moves slowly, almost drifting now, across the final stretch of open water. The distant pier where you began is getting closer, a quiet beacon in the moonlit night. The story is folding in on itself, the grand tapestry of the East being carefully put away. The gondolier's voice is gentle, a soft murmur that feels like the turning of the last few pages of a beloved book. After leaving Persia, he says, the Polo's journey back was a simpler affair. They traveled overland through Trebizond and then by sea through Constantinople, finally arriving back here in Venice. In the year 1295, they had been gone for 24 years. The number hangs in the air, immense and almost incomprehensible. A quarter of a century. You try to imagine the Venice they returned to. It would have been both intimately familiar and strangely foreign. The stones, the canals, the bells would be the same, but the faces would be new. Friends of their youth would be old men or gone. They were, in a sense, ghosts returning to their own lives. The story of their return is a famous one in Venice, the gondolier says with a soft chuckle. They arrived at their family home, dressed in worn, Tartar-style clothes, their faces weathered beyond recognition. Their own relatives didn't believe it was them. They had been presumed dead for decades. You can picture the scene, the confusion, the disbelief. These strange men, speaking a Venetian dialect thick with foreign accents, claiming to be the long-lost Polos. So, to prove who they were, he continues, the story taking on the quality of a fairy tale. They hosted a great dinner, and at the end of the meal, they brought out their old, shabby coats. With small knives, they began to slit the seams in the linings, and out poured a river of jewels, rubies, sapphires, diamonds, emeralds, the treasures they had sewn into their clothes for the final, dangerous leg of their journey. In that moment, all doubt vanished. This was not just a return, it was a legend made real. The image is dazzling, a cascade of impossible color and light in a dimly lit Venetian dining hall. But beneath the spectacle, there is a sense of deep pathos. They had to prove their identity with material wealth, because the true wealth they carried, the memories, the knowledge, the transformation of their very souls was invisible to everyone else. But the story does not end there, the gondolier says, his voice growing more contemplative. A few years later, Venice was at war with its rival, Genoa. Marco, now a wealthy and respected merchant, commanded a galley in the Venetian fleet. He was captured in battle and thrown into a Genoese prison. The gondola is now just a few feet from the dock, gliding silently over the dark water. The journey is almost over, and it was there, he says in a dark, damp prison cell, that he found his final purpose. To pass the time, he began to tell the stories of his travels to a fellow prisoner, a writer of romances named Rustic Hello da Pisa. Rustic Hello was captivated. He wrote it all down, not in Italian but in French, the literary language of the time. A quiet, profound thought settles in your mind. If Marco had not been thrown into that prison with that specific man, his story might have been lost forever. It might have survived only as a collection of tall tales told in the taverns of Venice. History turns on such small, strange chances. The entire world's knowledge of his journey depended on a lost battle and a chance encounter in a jail cell. And so the book was born, the gondolier says softly. The Travels of Marco Polo, a book that would change the world. It was a description of the world, a geography, a merchant's handbook, and an adventure story all in one. For centuries, it was Europe's only window into the vast, mysterious continent of Asia. People called him Il Million, the gondolier adds, the man of a million lies. They simply could not believe his stories. Burning rocks, paper money, a city with 12,000 bridges. It was too much for their minds to comprehend, but he never recanted. On his deathbed, when a priest urged him to confess his fabrications, he famously said, "I have not told half of what I saw." The gondola nudges the wooden pier with a soft, final bump. The story has arrived at its end. The book is written, the life is lived. The voice of the old man falls silent, leaving only the gentle lapping of the water and the quiet hum of the sleeping city. The narrative journey is complete, and your mind is now fully back here, in the present, in the deep, peaceful quiet of the Venetian night. The gondola rests against the pier, its long journey concluded. But you do not move to get out just yet. The old gondolier doesn't urge you. He allows the silence to settle, to let the echoes of the grand tale fade naturally. He gives one last, gentle push of his oar, not to propel the boat forward, but to turn it slightly, to guide its nose along a different path, away from the pier and into one last, narrow canal. It is a silent invitation to a final, quiet epilogue. The canal you enter now is one of the most famous and yet, in this moment, one of the most peaceful in all of Venice. Ahead of you, spanning the narrow waterway, is a covered bridge, connecting a grand palace on the left with a dark, severe-looking building on the right. Even in the moonlight, you recognize it instantly. Every bridge in Venice has a story. The gondolier's voice returns, now a soft, almost ethereal whisper. It's no longer the voice of a storyteller, but of a quiet philosopher. We have crossed many tonight, bridges to the sea, bridges to the desert, bridges to the desert, bridges to the court of the Khan. But this bridge tells a different kind of story. His words are slow measured. The gondola drifts towards the bridge with an almost imperceptible motion. The water here is dark and still, shadowed by the two large buildings it connects. The palace on the left, he says, gesturing with a subtle nod, is the Doge's palace, the seat of power, the hall of justice. The building on the right is the prison. This bridge was the final walkway for convicts. After their sentencing in the palace, they would walk across this enclosed passage to the cells, where they would spend their days, or from which they would be led to their execution. The history of the place settles like a cool mist. You look up at the bridge. It is beautiful, made of white Istrian stone, with two small barred windows, an architectural gem built for such a sorrowful purpose. The name, he continues, his voice gentle, was given to it by a poet centuries later. He imagined the size of the prisoners as they took their last look at the outside world through these small windows, their last glimpse of the sky, of the lagoon, of the beauty of Venice, before being plunged into darkness. You drift slowly, directly underneath it. You look up at the stone floor of the bridge, imagining the footsteps that have crossed it, the weight of the sorrow it has borne. But in the deep quiet of this night, there is no sense of fear or anguish. The sighs have long since faded, absorbed by the ancient stones and the quiet water. All that remains is a profound and gentle melancholy. It is a bridge of endings, the gondolier murmurs. A reminder that all journeys, even the grandest ones, must eventually conclude. Marco Polo's journey ended. The great empire of the Khan faded into history. Even our own small voyage tonight is coming to a close. This thought does not feel sad. It feels peaceful. The acceptance of endings is its own kind of wisdom. The bridge is not just a monument to sorrow, but a monument to the transient nature of all things. It reminds you that the beauty of a moment is often heightened by the knowledge that it cannot last forever. A quiet, reflective thought comes to you. Marco Polo himself, a prisoner in Genoa, crossed his own kind of bridge of sighs. He too had lost his freedom. But in that darkness he did not sigh. He spoke. He turned his ending into a new beginning, transforming his memories into a story that would outlive him, outlive empires. He found a way to turn a passage of sorrow into a bridge of light for the rest of the world. But look, the gondolier whispers. You follow his gaze. Through the arch of the bridge on the other side, the canal opens up again to the wide lagoon. And there, framed perfectly by the stone archway, is the moon, hanging low over the water, casting a brilliant, shimmering path of light. Even from a bridge of size, he says, there is a view of the light. An ending is often just a frame for a new perspective. The gondola drifts out from under the bridge's shadow and back into the soft, silvery glow of the moon. The moment of melancholy has passed, transformed into one of serene, quiet beauty. The brief passage through the shadow has made the light on the other side seem even more brilliant, more welcoming. You are almost back where you started, but the journey has changed you and your perception of this quiet, magical city forever. The gondola completes its slow, graceful arc, turning away from the view of the open lagoon and the memory of the Bridge of Sighs. It moves with a final, deliberate purpose back towards the small, familiar pier where this entire journey began. The motion is so smooth, so quiet, it feels less like a boat on water and more like a thought returning to a state of rest. The gondolier says nothing for a long time. The only sounds are the almost imperceptible ones, the soft shush of the water parting before the prow, the faint drip of water from the oar as he lifts it, a final, gentle creak of the oarlock. These sounds have become your companions, the rhythmic, soothing heartbeat of this nocturnal voyage. Now, they feel like a farewell. You look at the approaching pier. It's no longer just a collection of wood and stone. It has become a symbol, a place of beginning and ending. The solid ground from which you launched into a world of dreams, and the safe harbor to which you are now returning. The moonlight seems to have softened, the air grown cooler, stiller. The city is sinking into its deepest phase of sleep, just before the first hints of dawn. And so we return. The gondolier's voice is a low murmur, barely louder than the water itself. It's not a statement of fact, but a gentle confirmation of a natural process. Every voyage, no matter how far it roams, holds within it the promise of return. The gondola slides alongside the wooden pilings of the dock. The boatman uses his, pressing it against the pier to bring the gondola to a perfect, soft stop. There is no bump, no jolt, just a cessation of movement. The rocking, which has been your constant companion, the very cradle of this journey, is gone. And in its absence, you feel a profound stillness settle over you. The gondolier pulls the boat a little closer to the stone steps. You can see them clearly now, the same worn, uneven steps you descended what feels like a lifetime ago. They seem to be waiting for you, solid and dependable. Marco Polo came back to this city, the gondolier says, his voice a soft, final reflection. He came back to the stone and the water, to the sound of the church bells in the dialect of his youth. After seeing the entire world, he came home. One wonders, did the canals seem smaller to him? Did the palaces seem less grand after the splendors of the Khan? He lets the question hang in the quiet air. Perhaps he continues answering his own query, but perhaps he also saw them with new eyes. Perhaps he understood, in a way he never could have before he left, the unique and fragile magic of this impossible city. Sometimes, you have to leave a place to truly see it for the first time. This quiet wisdom resonates deeply. The journey you have taken tonight, a journey of the imagination, has done the same. It has carried you to faraway lands, filled your mind with wonders. And now, as it returns you to the quiet of your own space, it allows you to feel the comfort and peace of this moment with a fresh, heightened awareness. The gondolier extends his hand to you, just as he did at the beginning. His grip is warm and steady, As you place your hand in his and step from the slight instability of the boat onto the solid, unmoving stone, you feel a sense of grounding. You are back on firm land. You stand on the steps for a moment, looking back at the gondola resting on the dark, silent water. The old man doesn't push off immediately. He simply stands there, a silhouette against the moonlit canal, his presence a quiet, comforting constant. He gives you one last, small nod, a gesture of farewell, of thanks, and of shared secrets. It is a promise that the magic of the night is real, and that it will be here, waiting, whenever you choose to return. The water journey is complete, the tales have been told. The only thing left is the short, quiet walk from the water's edge back to the promise of warmth and rest. The final leg of the journey is yours and yours alone. You turn from the silent gondolier in the dark, sleeping water. You take a step up, and then another, your feet finding the familiar, solid feel of the stone. The air on the quay feels different from the air on the canal, a little warmer, a little drier. You are back in the world of streets and squares, but the profound quiet of the city remains unbroken. You begin to walk, your soft footsteps the only sound in the stillness. The path ahead of you is the same one you took when you first arrived, but it looks different now. It is no longer a path into a mystery, but a path leading home. The moonlight, which at the start of the night seemed bright and revealing, now feels soft and gentle, like a blanket laid over the sleeping city. It casts long, deep shadows that you walk through, patches of cool darkness that feel like a final, gentle caress from the night. As you emerge from a shadow, the moonlight catches the worn texture of the flagstones, turning the humble, everyday path into a road of pale silver. You follow this silver road, with no need to think about the direction. Your body knows the way back. It feels like an instinct. A quiet, final thought from the life of the traveler comes to you. Marco Polo in his old age became a homebody. He rarely left Venice again. He, the man who had crossed the known world, found his final contentment within the familiar labyrinth of his own city. Perhaps the greatest gift of travel is not the adventure itself, but the deep, unshakable appreciation it gives you for the concept of home. The knowledge that after all the wonders and all the trials, there is a place to return to, a place that is yours. You look up at the windows of the houses you pass. They are all dark. Behind each one, people are dreaming their own dreams, traveling to their own privates on a duet. The entire city is on a voyage, a collective journey through the realms of sleep, and you are now ready to join them. You can feel a pleasant weight in your limbs, the gentle, satisfying weariness that comes at the end of a long and beautiful day. Your eyelids feel heavy, not with tiredness, but with a deep, peaceful readiness for rest. The rocking of the gondola seems to have settled into your very bones, a subtle, soothing rhythm that continues to lull you, even now that you are on solid ground. The path ahead leads to a familiar doorway. A gentle, warm light seems to emanate from it, a silent welcome. This is the end of your walk, the end of your Venetian night. You know that beyond this doorway lies a space of comfort and warmth, a soft bed, a place where the stories of the night can settle and transform into your own peaceful dreams. The moon has been your guide, your lantern through the dark canals and the winding corridors of history. Now, its light has led you back to your own quiet haven. You feel a sense of profound gratitude for the journey, for the stories, for the quiet, gratitude for the gentle voice that guided you, and for the peace that has settled deep within your heart. You reach the threshold. The silver path of moonlight ends here. The path ahead is one of darkening, comfortable darkness. The darkness of a quiet room, the darkness of closed eyes. The darkness of closed eyes, the darkness of deep and restorative sleep. You take one last, slow breath of the cool night air, carrying the scent of stone and water and history. And then you step across the threshold, leaving the moonlit city behind, ready for the final, most peaceful journey of the night. And so, our journey comes to its gentlest close. The canals of Venice fade now, the moonlight dissolving into a soft, silvery memory. The voice of the old gondolier becomes a whisper on the edge of hearing, his tales of Marco Polo now woven into the fabric of a dream you once had. The grand palaces and the distant deserts, the taste of salty tea and the cool touch of porcelain. They are all receding, leaving behind only a feeling of profound peace. Your own breathing is the only tide now, rising and falling in a slow, deep, and steady rhythm. Each breath in draws the quiet of the night deep into your being, and each breath out releases the last remnants of the waking world. Your body feels heavy and wonderfully relaxed, sinking softly into the surface beneath you. The path you followed along the water's edge has led you here to this place of perfect stillness. There is nowhere else you need to be. Let the gentle rocking of the gondola, that slow, lulling rhythm you felt so clearly, carry you now, not through the water, but over the threshold of sleep. The story is complete. Your own journey into rest is just beginning. Let the weight of your eyelids be a comfort, a final soft curtain falling on the day. You are safe. You are at peace. Let go now and drift into a deep and gentle sleep. The end of the article. Good night.